Welcome to The Opposing View, the podcast where structured debate meets the world's most pressing questions. In each episode, two experts explore opposing sides of a single, consequential idea. No shouting, no noise, just evidence, logic, and a sharp exchange of ideas. Today's motion: solar flares pose a real threat to human civilization within the coming 10 years. Is that grounded concern or just sci-fi panic? The sun powers life on Earth, but it also hurls unpredictable bursts of energy toward us. Solar flares, coronal mass ejections, space weather with the potential to disrupt satellites, power grids, and communication systems. But how likely is a truly catastrophic event? And how would it look like? And how vulnerable is our modern infrastructure? To explore this, we present two opposing voices. One argues that we're facing an underappreciated existential risk, that another Carrington-scale event could send shockwaves through everything from GPS to global trade. The other insists that while solar activity is real, our systems are far more resilient than we think, and that fear distracts from more imminent risks. Two rounds, one big question, and in the end, you decide. Let the debate begin. Before we begin, let me introduce today's two experts. First, Dr. Lars Brenner, a Swedish heliophysicist. He's published extensively on solar flare prediction, satellite shielding, and infrastructure vulnerability to geomagnetic storms. He argues for the motion that solar flares pose a significant threat to human civilization within the next 10 years. Opposing him is Dr. Susan Okoye, a Nigerian-American electrical systems engineer and professor. Her work focuses on large-scale grid resilience, including geomagnetic induction effects and electromagnetic pulse mitigation. She argues against the motion, insisting that while solar flares are a valid concern, global systems are more robust and adaptable than public perception suggests. As always, two rounds, up to 2 minutes per expert per round. Round 1, opening arguments. Round 2, rebuttals and direct critique. And now, let's begin with round 1. Dr. Brenner, please open today's debate.
Thank you, John, for your kind introduction. Let's begin with this. Solar storms are not rare, they're cyclical. Every 11 years, the sun enters a period of heightened activity known as solar maximum, marked by a sharp increase in flares and coronal mass ejections. We are now entering solar cycle 25, and NASA and NOAA both expect peak activity between 2025 and 2026, stronger than previously forecasted. Here's what that means. According to NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center, there's a roughly 1 in 8 chance, 12%, of a Carrington-level solar storm hitting Earth within the next decade. That's not speculative. That's peer-reviewed astrophysics. And we are woefully underprepared. The US National Academies and UK Royal Academy of Engineering have repeatedly warned that satellites are vulnerable to radiation surges. GPS and aviation can suffer major blackouts. High-voltage transformers can be irreparably damaged by geomagnetically induced currents. One transformer failure is recoverable. A continent-wide outage affecting multiple grid sectors is not. A 2013 Lloyd's report estimates a 0.6 to 2.6 trillion economic hit in the US, alone from a severe geomagnetic storm, with recovery timelines ranging from weeks to years in worst-case scenarios. Crucially, we are not just talking about power loss, we're talking about no communications, no internet routing, no global finance, no cold storage for medicine, no transport coordination. This is a system-level risk, and the very nature of our digital infrastructure has made it increasingly fragile. As solar cycle intensity rises, so does exposure, and yet global investment in hardening and redundancy remains minimal. This is not a hypothetical, it's a blind spot. The threat of solar flares is not science fiction, it's science fact, with real probabilities and real consequences. The question isn't whether the sun will erupt, it's whether we'll be ready when it does. We have less than a decade to prepare, and right now, we are not ready.
A stark warning from Dr. Brenner, one that frames solar flares not as distant anomalies, but as imminent systemic threats. But is the risk overstated? Are our technological systems more robust than we give them credit for? To offer a counterview, here is Dr. Susan Okoye.
Thank you. Let's begin by separating impact from likelihood and placing both in context. Yes, solar flares exist. Yes, they can be disruptive. But no, they do not pose a credible threat to human civilization within the next 10 years. Here's why. The Carrington event of 1859 is often cited, but it was an outlier in both scale and effect. Modern estimates suggest that an event of that magnitude has roughly a 1 in 100 to 1 in 200 chance per decade of recurring, not 12%. And even if such an event occurred, the assumption of total collapse is flawed. Since the 1989 Quebec blackout, global power systems have actively adapted. Transformer shielding has improved. Real-time monitoring of space weather is now routine. Satellites are placed in safe mode during storms. Power grids ramp down current flows to mitigate induced currents. In short, mitigation systems exist and they work. The US alone has multiple agencies tracking space weather. NOAA's Space Weather Prediction Center, NASA's Heliophysics Division, and the National Space Weather Strategy developed in 2019. Many grid operators even model GMD risk into infrastructure decisions. Moreover, compare this risk to other existential threats: climate collapse, AI misuse, nuclear escalation. Solar flares are real, but they don't operate with agency or malice. They are predictable, trackable, and manageable. Let's not mistake visibility for priority. The fear surrounding solar flares is often based on worst-case stacking of uncorrelated vulnerabilities, not a realistic assessment of resilience or response. We should continue to invest in infrastructure. Yes, but to claim that solar flares are an imminent threat to civilization distorts the signal and inflates the noise. In a world of overlapping risks, this is one we're far more ready for than we think.
Thank you, Dr. Okoye. We've now heard both sides lay out their primary arguments. One focused on vulnerability and timing, the other on resilience and proportion. But now we move to the second round, rebuttals. This is where each expert challenges the assumptions, logic, or data of the other. Let's return to Dr. Lars Brenner.
Dr. Okoye is correct that improvements have been made, but her argument presumes a level of preparedness that simply doesn't exist at scale. Let's clarify. The 2019 U.S. National Space Weather Strategy is a policy framework, not a global infrastructure solution. Only a handful of critical transformers in the U.S. have been retrofitted with GIC blockers. In Europe, many countries still lack real-time protocols for large-scale GMD events. She also cites the 1989 Quebec storm, but that event was 10 to 20 times weaker than the Carrington event. Even so, it knocked out power for 9 hours and damaged transformers beyond repair. Satellite shielding may have improved, yes, but not enough to protect the entire LEO and GNSS constellation from the prolonged CME exposure. And safe mode only helps if there's warning time, which, in the event of a fast CME, could be as little as 15 minutes. As for probability, Eastwood's 1 in 100 estimate is based on historical averaging, which underrepresents solar cycles with incomplete data. NASA's 12% figure comes from Bayesian modeling that accounts for event clusters, and it's widely cited by risk analysts. Finally, resilience is not just about technology, it's about interdependence. Power grids are connected to financial systems, water treatment, food storage, emergency services. One cascading failure isn't just possible. It's mathematically modeled in DHS and FEMA simulations. Preparedness is not global, resilience is not universal, and the clock is ticking.
A sobering response, and a reminder that mitigation is not the same as immunity. Now let's turn to Dr. Okoye for her rebuttal.
Thank you. Let me start with this. If the argument hinges on what could happen if everything fails, then we are no longer assessing likelihood. We're indulging in disaster stacking. Dr. Brenner is right that interdependence increases complexity, but systems with many connections can also self-correct faster. That's basic network theory. Let's examine the 2013 Lloyd's report. Yes, it projects $2.6 trillion in losses, but that's based on unmitigated exposure, worst-case cascade, and assumes no international coordination. Today, power operators in 34 countries receive real-time solar storm alerts. GNSS satellites are being redesigned with hardened avionics, and SpaceX alone has already begun CME modeling for its Starlink infrastructure. These are not fringe efforts. They are industry-wide norms, especially in sectors like aviation, telecom, and defense. Also, not all transformers are vulnerable. Only EGV transformers in high-latitude regions face significant GIC exposure. That's not the global grid. The idea of a civilization-level threat over the next decade requires far more correlation than the data supports. Let's focus funding where the evidence points. Hardening where risk is localized. Strengthening satellite coordination. Investing in broad resilience, not just solar defense. In other words, be smart, not scared.
Two opposing views. One sees fragility in complexity. The other sees resilience in adaptation. What's clear is this: solar activity is rising. Our exposure is real. But how we interpret that risk and act on it may define how we navigate the coming decade. Tell us in the comments, which expert made you think twice? Do you believe the risk is real or overblown? And what kind of preparedness feels most urgent? Thanks for listening to Opposing View, where structure meets disagreement, and every question has more than one answer. Until next time, stay critical, stay curious,